Today we're going to talk about whether there should be term limits for members of Congress. So hit that subscribe button and turn on that notification bell so you stay educated on how your money works. The idea of imposing term limits for Congress, or a mandatory restriction on how long members of the House and Senate can serve in office, has been debated by the public for centuries. There are pros and cons and strong opinions on both sides of the issue, perhaps a surprise given the electorate's less than flattering opinion of their representatives in modern history. So are there term limits for Congress now? The answer is no. Members of the House of Representatives are elected for 2 years at a time and can serve an unlimited number of terms. Members of the Senate are elected for 6 years and also can serve an unlimited number of terms. So are there term limits for the president? Presidents are restricted to only 2 4-year terms in the White House under the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, which reads in part, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice." So that begs the question, have there been attempts to impose term limits on Congress? The answer is yes. There have been numerous attempts by some lawmakers to pass statutory term limits, but all of those proposals have been unsuccessful. Perhaps the most famous attempt at passing term limits came during the so-called Republican Revolution when the GOP took control of Congress in the 1994 midterm elections. Term limits were a tenet of the Republican contract with America. The contract called for a removal of career politicians through a first-ever vote on term limits as part of the Citizens Legislature Act. However, term limits never came about. So what does the Constitution have to say about term limits? The Founding Fathers did in fact consider and reject the idea of congressional term limits. Federalist Papers No. 53, James Madison, father of the Constitution, explained why the Constitutional Convention of 1787 rejected term limits. He said to rationalize this that a few members of Congress will possess superior talents, will be frequent re-elections, become members of long standing, will be thoroughly masters of the public business, and perhaps not unwilling to avail themselves of those advantages. The greater the proportion of new members of Congress and the less the information of the bulk of the members, the more apt that they will fall into the snares that may be laid before them. So the only way to impose term limits on Congress is to amend the Constitution. So then let's talk about the pros and cons of congressional term limits. Even political scientists remain divided on the question of term limits for Congress. Some argued that the legislative process would benefit from fresh blood and ideas, while others viewed the wisdom gained from long experience as essential to the continuity of government. So then what are the pros of term limits? 1. It limits corruption. The power and influence gained by being a member of Congress for a long period of time tempt lawmakers to base their votes and policies on their own self-interest instead of those of the people. Term limits would help prevent corruption and reduce the influence of special interests. Second, Congress is not a job. Being a member of Congress should not become the office holder's career. People who choose to serve in Congress should do so for noble reasons and a true desire to serve the people, not just to have a perpetual, well-paying job. Number 3, it brings in some fresh ideas. Any organization, even Congress, thrives when fresh new ideas are offered and encouraged. The same people holding the same seat for years leads to stagnation. Basically, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. New people are more likely to think outside the box. And fourth, it reduces fundraising pressure. Both lawmakers and voters dislike the role money plays in the democratic process. Constantly facing re-election, members of Congress feel pressured to devote more time to raising campaign funds than to serving the people. While imposing term limits might not have much of an effect on the overall amount of money in politics, it would at least limit the amount of time elected officials will have to donate to fundraising. So what are the cons of imposing term limits? First, it's undemocratic. Term limits would actually limit the right of the people to choose their elected representatives. As evidenced by the number of incumbent lawmakers re-elected in every midterm election, many Americans truly like their representative and want them to serve for as long as possible. The mere fact that a person has already served should not deny the voters a chance to return them to office. Number 2, experience is valuable. The longer you do a job, the better you get at it. Lawmakers who have earned the trust of the people and proven themselves to be honest and effective leaders shouldn't have their service cut short by term limits. New members of Congress face a steep learning curve. Term limits would reduce the chances of new members growing into the job and becoming better at it. Number 3, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Yes, term limits would help eliminate some of the corrupt, power-hungry, and incompetent lawmakers, but it would also get rid of all the honest and effective ones. Number 4, getting to know each other. One of the keys to becoming a successful lawmaker is working well with other members. Trust and friendship among members across party lines are essential to progress on controversial legislation. Such politically bipartisan friendships take time to develop. Term limits would reduce the chance for legislators to get to know each other and use those relationships to the advantage of both parties and, of course, the people. And number 5, it won't really limit corruption. From studying the experience of state legislatures, political scientists suggest that instead of draining the swamp, congressional term limits would actually make corruption in the US Congress worse. Term limit advocates contend that lawmakers who do not have to worry about being re-elected will not be tempted to cave in to pressure from special interest groups and their lobbyists, and will instead base their votes solely on the merits of the bills before them. However, history has been shown that inexperienced term-limited legislatures are more likely to turn to special interests and lobbyists for information and direction or legislation and policy issues. In addition, with term limits, the number of influential former members of Congress would decrease dramatically. Many of these former members would, as they do now, go to work for private sector lobbying firms where their deep knowledge of the political process helps to advance special interest causes. So what are your thoughts? Do you think Congress should have term limits or not? Leave a comment down below and let's get a discussion started. And as always, take care of your money. Today's book of the day is The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. I'll leave a link to the book down below, and if you prefer listening to it on an audiobook for free, I'll also leave a link to a 30-day free trial to Audible. You can choose this book or any book to listen to, and even if you cancel before your free trial is over, you can still keep the book and listen to it whenever you want.